This is the morning program with Gareth Parker on 882 6PR, the voice of Perth.
Well, online safety is a big thing for parents of kids, teenagers and so on, and I think it's a difficult thing to keep on top of because the range of things that are out there that are potentially problematic and unsafe continue to evolve. There's a website called Omegle, which I must confess I'd never heard of. Never heard of it, but it's apparently one of these video chatting websites. Omegle is its name. Paul Litherland is a former WA police officer who used to deal with this sort of stuff. He's now got his own business. It's called Surf Online Safe, and we've spoken to Paul on the program in the past. Paul, good morning.
Morning, Gareth. How are you?
I'm good, mate. Thanks for your time today. Tell us about Omegle.
Well, this it's a pretty frustrating site, this one, from a parent's perspective. I've been dealing with a number of schools over the last 5 years, and it's one that a lot of parents just unaware of. It's basically a chat site, so you can jump on the site. You don't need our age verification at all. So unfortunately, a number of our younger kids are actually just typing into Google. It comes straight up, so you jump straight into the site, and you can chat cam to cam or video to video with literally anyone around the world, and that's pretty frustrating because that's almost how they promote the site. Chat with strangers, and it's quite a reckless site, unfortunately.
So, I mean, what's the legitimate purpose, if I can put it that way? What do Omegle say that you get out of it if you use this site? And then we'll get on to the reality next.
And that's a great question. In reality, I mean, I've had those conversations with a number of organisations who create these sites, and most of them will say it's just merely for interaction to make the world a better place in regards to you can interact with people all around the world. A video chat service in its infancy is pretty good. If you want to chat with your uncle or your auntie who's in the UK and you're here in Perth, it's great. So unfortunately, everything else that comes along with it is where most parents and myself are having major issues.
Okay, Paul, so what is the reality of Omegle?
Oh, wow. I mean, the stuff I deal with quite regularly, especially with young kids, is they're jumping on to not only interact with their peers, which is fine, but while they're in there, they're being approached and interacting with a number of other people around the world who are obviously not there with the intention to make friends or say good day, but clearly with other thoughts in mind. And the vast majority of the cases I deal with, that's of a sexual nature. So you've got, sadly, mainly adult males who are more than happy to interact in a sexual nature with young kids who might be on this network.
So it's pretty unsavoury, Paul, but you actually did a little experiment.
Yeah, I've done a number of experiments on the network over the last 4 years since it's been around, and probably 3 30-minute sessions I dealt with across the network where I was using a method that's used by a number of investigators around the world where you're just streaming video of a young child. And this isn't of a sexual nature. This is a kid sitting in front of a computer looking at a screen, and so you're interacting with people on this site who believe they're now chatting with in this instance, a 12-year-old girl, but in fact it's actually me hiding behind the camera.
Sure.
And what they're prepared to do, or more importantly, what they're trying to coerce this child into doing is just abhorrent, mate. It's very, very frustrating.
And so your message, your frustration that you're expressing is that the operators of these sites don't really take any precautions. Yes, you've got to click something that says, oh, I'm over 18, but there's no checks beyond that. You don't have to sign up for an account. It's anonymous. There's no way to keep track of any of that stuff.
No, and this is where I think the fight I'm trying to make is trying to really put some ownership back onto these organisations to start taking some responsibility for the networks they're using. And unfortunately, Omegle, like many, are run out of the US. The person who created it was 18 years of age when he first created the first site. And so it's trying to push that onus back on them to be a bit more secure. But their argument quite constantly, and this is experience I had not only as a police officer and now as an educator, is, oh, well, we're not responsible for our users and we really can't control who's using the site. So I take that as a bit of a cop-out, and the issues I have, presenting now to almost 300 schools in WA is 5 years ago, Gareth, or 4 years ago, you wouldn't have kids using these sites, but now I'm getting anywhere between 15 to 20% at primary schools and anywhere between 50 to 70% at high schools, teenagers using these sites. So it is, I think, needs to be addressed.
As you said, it is a cop-out. It's totally a cop-out. It's up to the programmers to put in place the appropriate controls, but as you say, we can't really do much about that.
No, and I mean, you can imagine walking through a shopping centre with your child or your young daughter or young son, and you had a 40-year-old male come up to your child and he exposed himself, took your daughter or son by the hand and said, let's go and play. That bloke could be arrested within an instant. But for some reason, you can create an online environment and that level of ownership is being pushed back to users. And I understand that to a degree, but if the shopping centre turned around and said, oh, we're not going to take any action or help the police because your daughter or son chose to come into the shopping centre, that's a ridiculous analogy. So, but pretty much most of our sites are saying that. So this is where my argument's continuing to come in, where trying to educate users is a paramount, but you're trying to fight a fight that's almost impossible because a lot of these networks are just taking no ownership in regards to trying to help that message, which is what we're trying to fight here in Australia.
So if let's take the worst case scenario view of it that suggests, well, look, the software developers, the app developers aren't going to do anything about it, what do you then tell parents?
Oh, all you can do is educate. I mean, I mentioned sites like this in all of my presentations, and you'll ask the question, who's heard of this, who's heard of that, and it's amazing how many parents are unaware, not because they don't care, it's just there's so many of these out there and they're popping up all the time. So much of it is about just trying to educate the kids and users in regards to the risk of these sites, and then hopefully over time we'll get to a point where the creators of these sites will start actually going, you know what, we might have a bit of an obligation to help them out as well. That's what I'm trying to get to, but at the moment I think I'm pushing it uphill, as they say, and trying to fight a fight that's pretty difficult at the moment.
Well, I'd be interested to know from people if they've ever heard of this. Omegle, it's called, 92211 As I say, I hadn't heard of it, but it's obviously been around a while, Paul, and you know, I do think that it's concerning, as you say. It can't. I'm clearly not a child development expert, but I can't imagine there's anything positive that impacts upon a child or a teenager's psyche if they see this stuff from strangers, and then the whole psychology of the blokes who are doing it is a whole other story, I guess. Yeah, but it can't be positive.
And it is frustrating. I mean, even in my experience, you would have a number of kids who will actually jump on the site because they would have heard it. Someone would have said at school, "Oh, go check it out. It's funny," or it's rude. And of course, kids will jump on and have a bit of fun to a degree. If it might be a sleepover, they might be taking the mickey out of these people. Yeah. But in reality, some of the stuff they are seeing is affecting them. And then they might go home and jump on their own in their bedroom. Mum and dad have gone to sleep. So now their ability to be coerced in a way, especially our young ones, is quite significant. And I mean, the gentleman that's pictured on my website, clearly over 30 years of age, and trying to identify where he's from is difficult. And yes, a physical altercation, I suppose, is quite low. But how do we know that? How do we know that bloke isn't sitting 5 kilometres down the road from that child? So this is where you get those fears, and this is what parents worry about significantly. So trying to address that is very difficult.
Filtering, Paul, where do you stand on that?
Oh, filtering's okay, but unfortunately it doesn't really work for these sort of sites, because as much as you could block it at home, kids can still jump onto their own hotspot and have a look, or they can sleep over and one of their mates might have it. So again, it's very difficult to do that. I mean, in the perfect world, not that I condone China, but to be able to block these sort of sites from a country perspective would be ideal. But in reality, there's always ways around that. So from my perspective, it's just about education. It's just to get the kids to understand especially the young ones, to really understand the risk of such behaviour, to hopefully minimise their impact, because we're also having not only the fact that, yes, you might have predators on these sites, Gareth, but you're also got a number of scammers around the world who are also manipulating these sites, because you could have young kids, I mean, we're talking maybe 14, 15-year-old boys who might be experimenting, thinking they've got their gear off in front of a stranger who's never going to expose them, but in reality this could be a scammer. All of a sudden the video of them has been recorded and now being played back to them, and again, in my experience, pay me $5,000 or I'm going to post this video to all your friends on Facebook. So this is where it's just a massive area that's continuing to evolve, and as you can see in my article there, it's some pretty eye-opening sort of stuff that a lot of parents unfortunately are unaware of.
Paul, I guess it underscores at a bigger picture level around everything to do with internet usage that certainly for younger children, supervised internet usage is really the only way to go. And I think for older teenagers, if you can somehow create or cultivate a culture within your family that suggests we talk openly about internet usage, we don't have a problem with mum and dad checking usage history. We talk about the things that we do and use online.
And that's what I do at Surf Online Safe, Gareth, is the fact that so much of this is just about conversation. People think I'm the expert who comes out and solves all their internet issues for them. It's far from that. It's just about having conversations, and if we can start as early as possible. And some parents get a bit worried about that because they feel confronting talking to their kids about sexuality or being exposed online in this manner. But kids are pretty good. Kids are quite resilient, and they'll take those conversations. So it's just a matter of trying to approach them as much as you can and as softly as we can, so at least then our kids can have that little light bulb in the back of the mind, just go off and understand the risk, because then hopefully they're not going to expose themselves to that sort of level of concern, hopefully.
Thanks, Paul.
Well done, mate. All the best.
Good on you. Paul Litherland, Surf Online Safe is the name of Paul's business. He's a former WA police officer who used to investigate these sorts of things, a detective, so he knows the subject matter. Pretty ordinary subject matter, some of it, but nonetheless, good on Paul for bringing it to parents' attention.